Nestled within the confluence of the Delaware and Lehigh Rivers, Easton, Pennsylvania is steeped in a rich history of outlandish tales and colorful characters. First settled by European immigrants in 1739, the region had for centuries been home to the Lenni Lenape tribe of Native Americans, who referred to the area as Lechuatank, or Land of the Forks. But there is a darker side tucked between what we see and what we don't often speak of, tales of deceit, corruption, bootlegging, gangsters, and murder that permeates every inch of that rich history. In the Land of the Forks, or what would later become known as the borough of Easton, Pennsylvania, the manner of coexistence that ensued following the initial contact between the native peoples and the first trickle of European settlers was at best a tenuous accord. Early on, the Lenape, also known as the Delawares, quickly developed a distaste for these white intruders, and it wasn't all that unusual to see the sparks of antipathy often flare up into open hostilities. As a result, a mutual distrust between both groups broadened over time. Each held grievances toward the other, and neither appeared able nor willing to strike a lasting concordance that could be relied upon to any great effect. In a nutshell, the native inhabitants felt their lands encroached upon with impudent disregard, while the newcomers looked upon the tribe as little more than a band of savages who were incapable of any and all reason. The chasm of dissonance created in their relations soon appeared unbridgeable. The first real breakthrough finally appeared in 1682 with the arrival of William Penn. Penn, born in 1644, was most notably an English real estate entrepreneur and philosopher, as well as the founder of the province of Pennsylvania, a proponent of the mass emigration of English Quakers to North America. Penn purchased the colonial province of West Jersey in 1677, an often disputed division of New Jersey that existed between 1674 and 1702. And after he was granted a generous charter for 45,000 square miles west of New Jersey by King Charles II, William Penn was prepared to extend his push for Quaker occupation westward. As the world's largest non-royal landowner, Penn entertained the use of several names for his newly acquired land. His first choice, New Wales, was soon replaced by Sylvania, a term closely associated with the Latin word silva, meaning forest. Ultimately, Charles II had the final say and renamed the area Pennsylvania. On the surface, such plans for expansion could only spell more conflict for the Delaware nation. But Penn's intent to settle the land west of New Jersey would not be laced with malice. Instead, he opted to negotiate fairly with the Lenape, and in turn, they came to appreciate his genuine bearing and justness of his approach. As a result, he enjoyed a reputation among the Delaware nation for fair dealing that allowed him the benefit of open dialogue others of his ilk could never entertain. The Lenni Lenape held the Englishman in high regard and viewed him as one of the few white men on whom they could rely to be honest and open in dealings. William Penn's unique standing among the Delaware natives paid dividends on July 15, 1682. Whereas he stood beneath the branches of a large oak tree in Greystone Forest to meet with his native counterparts. In this spot located in modern-day Morrisville, Pennsylvania, he purchased his first tract of land from the Lenape. It was a landmark moment, and although tribal elders felt little apprehension towards dealing with William Penn and trusted him implicitly, the same could not be said of Penn's heirs moving forward. Following the death of their father, Thomas Penn and his brother John made it blatantly apparent that they would not be subscribing to the same ethics displayed by their father when it came to dealing with the settling of Native American lands. In fact, they completely abandoned their father's righteous philosophy and instead embarked upon a campaign to swindle the Lenape of their lands by any means possible. The brothers' fallacious assault began in 1737 when they claimed to have a deed in their possession that dated back to 1686, whereas the Lenape promised to sell a tract of land that began at the confluence of the Delaware and Lehigh rivers. From that point, they related the deed covered lands that extended as far west as a man could walk over the span of a day and a half. With no surviving evidence, the document in question was in all probability nothing more than an unsigned or unratified treaty, or perhaps even an outright forgery. But such details mattered little to the Penn brothers, who already had their agents selling parcels of land to colonists in areas still inhabited by the Lenape. As expected, the Native Americans were outraged. Not surprisingly, the Penn brothers and their agents were ready for such developments, to ease the tribe's resentment over what they perceived to be an overt act of wrongdoing. A Penn agent named James Logan offered them a map that purposely misrepresented the Lehigh River as being much closer to Dehicon Creek than it was in actuality. This map also included a dotted line that proposed the route a walker would take to satisfy the parameters of the proposed deed. Tribal leaders pored over the map as it lay before them and arrived at the conclusion that 40 miles would be the longest distance that could realistically be covered over such terrain in the allotted span of time. Convinced such a modest amount of land was not so great a price to pay to uphold their end of the 50-year-old agreement, they signed the document. However, the 63-year-old Logan and his devious cohorts had still more trickery up their collective sleeves in order to wrest a far greater amount of land away from the unsuspecting Lenape. The walk to determine the final boundaries of the land purchase was scheduled for the morning of September 19, 1737. It was still dark when several Lenape tribesmen arrived to witness the event. Shortly thereafter, they were met by several whites on horseback who greeted them with curt deference and set about the business of getting things started, expecting to see a single walker step forward to the starting line. The natives were startled to discover Logan had hired 3 of the fastest runners he could find. Yet another unexpected twist in the Penn brothers' tale of treachery. The 3 men began their trek at sunrise from a starting point near the Wrightstown Meeting House. As outlined in the deed, they were to head in a northwesterly direction. The runners set off at a hurried pace few thought they could maintain for any significant amount of time. The first of the trio collapsed within a few hours. A second slipped and fell violently into a creek shortly after daybreak the following morning and died 3 days later. The third, Edward Marshall, propelled himself forward to full length at the 36th hour and tightly grasped a sapling, the official mark that was declared the distance of the purchase. The sapling that Marshall held between his clenched fingers was located in the vicinity of present-day Jim Thorpe, a distance of some 70 miles from the starting point. The Lenape were appalled by the spectacle and felt betrayed. They asserted their assumption that the walk should have been taken at a more natural and leisurely pace than what had transpired. White authorities scoffed at the notion and maintained the terms of the treaty merely stated the boundaries would be designated by the distance traveled on foot, and contended the conditions spoke nothing of the speed traveled nor the engagement of a single participant. Although the Lenape were now well aware of the deceptive nature of the Penn brothers and Logan, they were wholly unprepared for the debauchery that was to follow. To oversee the walk and attest to its validity, Logan enlisted the assistance of Bucks County Sheriff Timothy Smith. At the conclusion of the event, Smith produced a map and drew a northwesterly line from the runner's starting point to the spot where Marshall ended his trip. He then drew another line that extended perpendicular to the first and stretched it northeasterly to the Delaware River, terminating at a spot near Milford, Pennsylvania. After doing so, he publicly laid claim to all lands east of these lines, in essence, a huge triangle that comprised some 1,200,000 acres. finally realizing the full magnitude of the misrepresentation that had befallen them. The Lenape pleaded for assistance to the powerful Iroquois Confederacy. The Iroquois made their intentions clear. They would not intervene on behalf of the Lenape, offering the excuse that it was not in their best interest. In truth, Logan employed one final act of skullduggery to seal the deal, for he had already made an agreement with the Iroquois to support the colonial side in the dispute. As a result, the Lenape had little choice but to vacate the lands. For Lechawatank, the proposed site of what was to become the settlement of Easton, it was an inauspicious start to say the least. Today, Easton is the easternmost city in Pennsylvania's culturally rich Lehigh Valley, positioned slightly more than 50 miles north of Philadelphia and 70 miles west of New York City. Tucked neatly in the low-lying corridor that is bordered by mountains to the north and to the south, its expanse of 4 3/4 miles is home to approximately 27,000 denizens of the valley's 800,000 inhabitants. It is not unlike other post-industrial eastern cities that the vicinity with urban centers boasting a vibrant downtown area that is pockmarked with neighborhoods where one would have to consider the prudence of a lone nighttime stroll. Even so, Easton ranks high in livability and has become a favorite destination for many transplanted Manhattanites who seem drawn to the promise of the future, as well as the lingering echoes of the past. Thomas Penn requested the town be laid out by 51-year-old William Parsons, an Englishman who had been appointed Surveyor General of the province 11 years earlier. Parsons was called upon to not only lay out the town, but the county as well. The town was laid out in 1752, and for this new territorial division, Penn needed a county seat. That honor fell to Easton, and it was officially founded later that same month. Although it was designated the county seat, a thriving metropolis it was not. In fact, by the end of 1752, a mere 11 families called Easton home. Considering by that point the fledgling town already had a jail, a whipping post, and a pillory set up on the south end of what was deemed the Great Square, one has to seriously ponder the extent of criminality strewn throughout its modest population. It is far more likely, however, the use of these devices of punishment were less intended for the town's inhabitants than for the type of individual the town was attracting. Being in such close proximity to the Delaware River, it was not accidental that Easton was establishing a reputation as a traveler's town. Not surprisingly, a number of inns, taverns, and hotels seemingly sprung up overnight. Hospitality, in one form or another, was becoming the town's predominant form of business. By 1756, the French and Indian War had descended upon Easton. A sense of fear permeated the lives of white settlers living in the Lehigh Valley, and more frequently, this anxiety often manifested into acts of violence aimed towards any band of Native Americans within striking distance. Before long, the threat of Indian attack shifted from mere fear to reality, and throughout the valley, atrocities on white homesteads increased dramatically and became an all too regular occurrence. Easton's establishments, such as the Red Lion Tavern and Bachman's Public House, were no longer merely gathering places for weary travelers and roughnecks to imbibe in a libation or two, but rather now served as structures of refuge for the local populace in times of attack. Within the walls of these places of hospitality, Easton would survive. "20 years and a second war later, the end of the American Revolution saw Easton blossom into a town of approximately 100 houses and some 500 residents. The town established itself as a principal ferry crossing along the Delaware River that connected Philadelphia with the Ohio countryside. Around 1783, a substantial influx of teamsters, boatmen, and transients had arrived, and a number of changes ensued that began to steadily reshape the fabric of the community. Simply put, these circumstances saw a growing yet questionable clientele with ready access to alcoholic beverages and quick cash come flooding in. As a result, many of Easton's taverns would ripen with amusements such as gambling and women of promiscuous intent, and the lucrative nature of such establishments were hard to ignore. That same year, many others followed suit, one such being the Black Horse Tavern. Originally built as a private residence, it didn't take the owners of the home long to recognize the monetary upside to jumping into the fray as a commercial establishment. Over the ensuing decades, the establishment saw a number of incarnations: a tavern, an inn, a stage stop, and even what was termed a canal stop. There was, however, one single constant in the history of the Black Horse that remained mostly unchanged: the debauchery that surrounded its clientele. It was this seedier element that cemented Easton's fast reputation well into the 20th century. As time progressed, the Lehigh Valley's entrance into the excesses of the Roaring Twenties was accompanied by a nearly unquenchable thirst for alcohol and overindulgence. The onset of Prohibition only seemed to exacerbate that thirst, and in doing so, secured Easton as a hub of illicit pleasure. And although the country was soon to be in the midst of the Great Depression, there was much money to be made in Easton by those willing to live outside the law and operate a number of illegitimate businesses. Illegal beer was soon being piped across the Delaware River into New Jersey by bootleggers determined to find creative ways to distribute their product. Brothels boasting the lascivious talents of their female employees lined both sides of Pine Street and offered all forms of physical companionship. And at one point, there were no less than 64 drinking establishments and houses of ill repute drawing customers from as far away as New York City. And one of those roadhouses in particular had a notorious reputation for catering to a suspect clientele: patrons who more often than not came with the credentials of mob affiliations. That establishment was the Black Horse Tavern. One of the shadier characters who was something of a regular at the Black Horse was named Saverio Damiano. Born in Italy in 1899, Damiano was a wise guy from Philadelphia who was known by a number of aliases including John Ferrara, Johnny Ferrara, Salvatore Donati, John Dean, and of course, the name he was most frequently associated with, Johnny the Wop. Damiano was a fellow of questionable integrity who made his living in the trafficking of both women and alcohol. He was presumed to be involved with a gang of Philadelphia mobsters who used Reading, PA as its base of operations. They were a treacherous lot whose hands were busy with far more than just bootlegging, human trafficking, and prostitution. They also engaged in kidnapping, extortion, and even murder with far too much regularity. Frequently running between Reading, Philadelphia, and New York City, Easton was merely a stop along the way, but a very lucrative one at that, mainly because of its inordinate number of roadhouses and brothels scattered in and about the city limits. For someone in Damiano's line of work, Easton was a veritable playground of profit. Johnny the Wop had become a frequent face around town. It certainly was a lucrative area to conduct his manner of business, but some speculated his presence was due to other reasons. There were quiet whispers about town that he was laying low after his alleged murder of a Philadelphia doctor. But there were others who speculated it may have been a woman named Virginia Evans who was truly at the heart of the matter. Evans was an attractive young blonde who went by the alias Emma Bain and had come to the attention of the 29-year-old mobster, feeding a steady stream of young ladies to the many houses of ill repute throughout the vicinity. Damiano had recently placed Evans in a Bethlehem brothel named Blonde Willie's. Whether or not Virginia Evans was merely another business transaction or something more will never be known. However, what is known for certain is a conflict or presence would come to create between Johnny the Wop and a fellow gangster named Anthony Tamburo. The 26-year-old Tamburo, also known as Jack Buckles, was yet another Philadelphia mobster who ran with the same gang as Damiano. He did business at many of the same places and perhaps to some degree was even more intimate with such establishments, for his wife owned one of the brothels they serviced. Even so, many fell under the impression that Tamburo had become smitten with Evans and made an overt move to take her from his associate. His actions didn't sit well with the Wop and subsequently resulted in a falling out between the two gangsters. This rift was magnified by the fact that the two men belonged to the same gang. And once diplomacy had run its course, it was only natural that lines of allegiance would be drawn by the other gang members and a more permanent solution would have to be found. On the evening of July 22, 1928, Damiano walked into the Black Horse Tavern accompanied by Joseph Rizzo, also known as Joe Palantino. Rizzo, a 22-year-old thug was living in Easton and was determined to prove his mettle as one of the younger gang members. The two men exchanged pleasantries with the crowd as they made their way to the bar. They took a seat and chatted with one of the tavern's co-owners, Sam Schwartz. As the clock struck 9 p.m., Damiano was called to the phone as Rizzo slipped from sight. Damiano rose from his seat at the bar and walked towards a phone booth that was located a few feet away from the top of a staircase that led to the building's basement. He placed the receiver to his ear and instantly recognized the voice on the other end as that of Sam Scalliott of Hazleton, a long-known underworld figure who made little pretense of his penchant for violence. The two had always been cordial, so the call brought no suspicion whatsoever to Johnny. At approximately the same moment as Damiano spoke into the phone, several men burst through the door of the Black Horse Tavern brandishing a variety of firearms, including sawed-off shotguns. They leveled their weapons at Damiano and chaos erupted around them. Three women, one blonde who many assumed was Virginia Evans, began screaming and raced from the building. Dozens of others dove for cover as the men opened fire. Damiano was hit repeatedly as he stumbled from the confines of the phone booth and down the nearby flight of stairs, falling to the basement below. The gunman slowly followed behind as the wounded gangster attempted to drag himself across the floor, leaving a bloody trail in his wake. A few feet from the foot of the stairs, Saverio Damiano stopped moving. Though never substantiated, there was at least one witness who claimed one of the shooters stood over the motionless body and fired a single bullet into the mobster's head. Looking up at his cohorts, he uttered, "Well, I guess he's had enough." The gunman then promptly fled the premises and made their escape in an automobile bearing New York plates. Johnny the Wop was dead. Police had no shortage of suspects to investigate. They arrested 9 people the following morning in order to gather as much evidence as possible before the trail went cold. Virginia Evans was also a suspect in the case for the manner in which she reacted to the assassin's arrival and then raced from the scene into a waiting car. Her actions gave police the distinct impression she knew what was about to go down. After following up on dozens of leads and eyewitness accounts, the investigation soon centered around 4 main suspects. Fiorini Morano, also known as Diamond Tooth Tony, was arrested in Reading and denied any connection whatsoever to the killing. He also denied having any links to organized crime. The next, Tony Testa, a wily and criminally inventive character known throughout the Philadelphia underworld as the bomb maker. For all his presumed intelligence, Testa was arrested as he stood on the corner of 3rd and Cherry Street in Harrisburg for something as trivial as loitering. Joseph Rizzo, who accompanied Damiano to the Black Horse on the night of the murder, was arrested in Harrisburg as well. And finally, there was Anthony Tamburo, aka Jack Buckles. The case the state built against Tamburo was perhaps the most compelling of the 4. Their strategy was simply to prove that the murder was nothing but a case of fatal jealousy brought about by a quarrel between the 2 men over Virginia Evans. It was a flimsy case at best, and it began disintegrating almost right from the start. Tamburo denied having been anywhere near the roadhouse on the night of the murder, instead stating he was in Allentown. Sam Scalliott corroborated his alibi, and state witnesses were no longer willing to attest otherwise with any degree of certainty. A little over a week after the trial began, Tamburo was acquitted on all charges. 2 months later, Tony Testa was preparing to go on trial for his part in the murder. This time, the state vowed to avoid the same pitfalls it incurred with Tamburo. The prosecution was confident their strongest witness against Testa would be Black Horse owner Sam Schwartz, one that all but guaranteed a guilty verdict. However, as the morning of the trial arrived, Schwartz had not returned from Europe, and there was little District Attorney Russell C. Mauch could do to proceed according to plan. Reluctantly, he announced to the stunned courtroom that he would not be trying Testa in light of the circumstances. Eventually, Rizzo and Morano would also be freed of all charges, and the murder of Saverio Damiano would remain unsolved. Ironically, justice is often served in the most predictable fashion, for most of those involved with the murder had eventually met with violent ends. This was particularly true of Anthony Tamburo, whose bullet-riddled corpse was found in a roadside ditch in Fries Mills, Pennsylvania, less than 2 years after Damiano met his demise. 10 years later, Fiorino Morano was stabbed to death in his home in Sharon Hill, Pennsylvania by his wife. So much for wedded bliss. Despite its sordid past as a rowdy roadhouse that plied patrons with illegal booze and loose women, the Black Horse Tavern did enjoy the merits of a far better reputation during the latter half of the 20th century. The building that was once the site of a tavern, a speakeasy, a mob hangout, and the scene of a savage murder had become an establishment that was a favorite of locals who enjoyed the combination of fun nightlife and great food. In 2002, Al and Marie Stempo reopened the establishment under the name Stemie's Place. Their mission was to serve up good food in a fun atmosphere, and to that end they were successful. But shortly after opening, they were serving something wholly unexpected in the way of eerie encounters between patrons and employees and the hereafter. Rattling doors, kitchen utensils moving on their own accord, and disembodied voices. During one encounter, El Stempo claimed to have chased a black dog into the building's basement. After descending the stairs in pursuit of the canine, a careful inspection revealed no dog to be found. Another hair-raising encounter occurred when a telephone repairman ventured into the basement to work near the location where Damiano's body was found. Stempo related to a reporter how he was in the bar when the repairman came upstairs, obviously shaken. His hair was all frizzled and his hands trembled. He said he needed to use the phone to have his wife pick him up and take him to the hospital. He never revealed what he saw in the basement that day, but it was obvious he was having a breakdown. It seemed as if most of the activity emanated from areas located in or around the basement, and throughout the community and beyond. It didn't take long for the Stempo's brushes with the supernatural to get around. In fact, even cable television's Animal Planet bought into the tales of phenomena and chronicled the family's experiences in an episode of The Haunted in 2009. Following Stemie's closing in the mid-2000s, the restaurant did a brief stint as bacon-centric. Today, the site of the former Black Horse Tavern is known as the Iron Mule. Opened in 2020, owner Kate Hugg has brought a sense of charm to an establishment that has been in operation for some 225 years. The raucous roadhouse environment of typical bar fare and beer, pool tables, and cigarette smoke hanging thick in the air have been replaced by an inviting atmosphere of genuine warmth that makes every customer who drops in feel like they're the most important customer in the room. The setting is comfortable and attractive, and the menu is chock full of tasty creations that will satisfy even the most discerning palate. The oversized burgers are as delicious as they are filling. The Uptown Burger in particular is really something special. High marks also go to the fish and chips, mule kick and shrimp, and garlic clams. Even so, if the tantalizing menu items and excitingly fresh drinks are not reason enough to stop in, there's more. In addition to the offering of live music, the staff is exceptional. It is immediately obvious that every employee one encounters goes above and beyond to be attentive and accommodating, and there's nary a time when a smile fails to greet anyone who enters the premises. The vibe is welcoming and gives a sense of belonging that is genuine. The sense of appreciation for the customer is a direct extension of the Mule's owner, Kate. She has a glow that cultivates an immediate connection. She is a kind spirit who smiles easily. Sitting with Kate for 20 minutes made us feel like we've known her a lifetime. She is also all in on the history of her restaurant and all that comes along with its resident spirit. In fact, it is not uncommon to hear her say, "Hello, Johnny," as she enters the building. She believes her greeting helps negotiate a peaceful coexistence between her and the former mobster. For she relates, Johnny is something of a prankster whose favorite pastime is moving chairs. Outside dining is also available on the patio to the rear of the building overlooking the canal. And just beyond the canal lies the Delaware River. The river acted as something of a thoroughfare for the illegal conveyance of booze during Prohibition. Also located on the property, there exists the remains of a now sealed-off tunnel entrance used by bootleggers to whisk their product to and from the building. Stand here but a moment in silence, and one can feel the history of the land rising around you. There's a reason this establishment has such a loyal following of dedicated patrons. I can say with certainty that meeting Kate and her staff, as well as the trip through history they allowed us to embark upon, was one of the most satisfying experiences we've ever been a part of. There's also one more thing of which you can be sure. Considering the history of this establishment, if I'm ever summoned to the phone while enjoying a drink, I'll certainly think twice before leaving the bar. If you like this content and would like to see more of the same, please click subscribe and feel free to leave me a comment if you have an infamous eatery you'd like to see covered.